Hey guys, what is up? Andy here, back at you with another video, and today I have got a cool interview planned. It's basically it's with a mate of mine, Jeff. He went to the Cannabis Expo in Mexico, and yeah, he's just going to tell us a little bit about it, a little bit about the ecosystem on that side in Mexico, a little bit about their sort of legislative side, how it compares to what's going on in SA, and yeah, Jeff's extremely knowledgeable on the topic. He's actually very much more qualified in sort of like the medical processing space. So that's his area of specialties. So it really adds a lot of value in terms of helping laymen like myself understand what's going on around the world and with all the complexities of the legislation. So guys, make sure to like and subscribe, and I hope you enjoy. Welcome, Jeff. Thanks for joining us with your exciting stories that we're about to hear. I have briefed the guys that you went on quite an adventure. And yeah, thanks for joining us. And why don't you jump ahead and just tell us in brief sort of your role at the Mexico Cannabis Expo?
Yeah, sure, 100%. It was quite nice. There were one or two South Africans that headed out that way to obviously collaborate with the Cannabis Expo South Africa. Obviously going international in this space, and Juicy Fields was the sponsor, which is still an entity I'm trying to figure out and understand a bit better how their model works to facilitate access to dealing in the plant and cultivation. But for me, it was a great opportunity to really talk about manufacturing and basically quality control aspects of medicinal cannabis, which is more my focus in the world. But increasingly, if you get medical products unpacked, and I think part of what I did there was try to bring everything under the same roof, having a registered medicine versus a non-registered medicine, having those different standards for those entities, having a wellness product that's either a novel food or not novel food, and then having your adult use products, which is ultimately where some of the more mature markets have gone and where the most lucrative markets are. But we go through these transitions where there's this adoption of medical standards and a medical framework, and that evolves into eventually a more accepting tone and view of the use of the plant for its benefits.
So who's learning more, South Africa or Mexico at these sort of events?
So, it was nice. I mean, the Mexican market's very interested in it because of the North American influence. So they've seen the proliferation across the border in North America. I think they are as excited to get started. But I would say this. There was actually a news release that came out just after I left Mexico at the end of June. And it was from CNN. It basically was Mexico's Supreme Court decriminalizes adult use, or basically decriminalizes recreational cannabis. But it has a caveat to it, because that sounds like a great headline.
Yeah.
But basically what it translated to was that the Supreme Court said Covapris, which is their medical regulator, has to go through a process of approving. So if someone applies to have cannabis, they have to, almost like in South Africa, apply to SAPRA to allow for them to have recreational cannabis, or, and up to 28 grams, which was surprising because, it's so easy to read a headline like that and just think the market's open. And you can go ahead. It's like New York, It's now adult use is in play. But we've seen this in South Africa. We've seen it in Mexico. We've seen it in other jurisdictions where there's this decriminalization push, but yet you still want to have a permitting structure, which creates a lot of confusion in those sectors. So, for me, it was interesting to see that dynamic and also have the different questions from everyone who attended the expo, which was quite a diverse audience.
So just for the guys that have jumped in that maybe don't know, so South Africa is predominantly, so you're allowed to grow for recreational use, you're allowed to have private consumption, as long as it's private and you're an adult is generally the baseline. So it's, the rules are very vague at the moment, but it is constitutionally in our right to be allowed to smoke cannabis. And on the Mexican side, so just to reiterate a little bit, so they've said it's decriminalized, but as long as you've got less than 28 grams and a permit?
Yeah, so it's a permitting process. So it's one where, it's technically not. It's one where the Supreme Court says...
That doesn't
but
sound
it's
like
similar. No, but
decriminalized.
it doesn't. It doesn't. But it's the same thing in South Africa. In a sense that you are allowed but you're not allowed to trade. So no trade can actively happen, which is a challenge for any commercial industry budding. So, there's still some... And the thing is, my concern is having someone like the medical regulator issue your permit can already tell you how long that's going to take in terms of the approval process. So it was quite curious. And for me, what was really nice about the expo, going back to the expo, was they also had this live translation of the speakers. So if you had a Spanish speaker on, you could listen to the live translation of them, which is quite a nice thing to actually see at these expos. So increasingly, it reminded me how international this market is becoming. And as it becomes more and more international, these instant translation services, it's really allowing for ideas and understandings of concepts, provided the translator's good, to get across. So it was quite nice to see how the Spanish culture, I use Spanish, but the Mexican culture, mostly Spanish-speaking countries outside of Portuguese countries in South America, how prolific and interested they are in realizing the same thing we do in Africa, which is let's get the plant into the right hands. Increasingly, yes, it is a medical framework in Mexico, but we hope that it would be one of the quickest changing markets because of the proximity to North America.
To the States, yeah. So did you notice any sort of, I think obviously if you go to an expo in South Africa, there's a big focus on agriculture and growing because that's sort of where our liberties lie. Was there a focus perhaps on, I suppose the expo, you were there and speaking on a sort of medical processing sort of side, but was there more of a focus on like rec in terms of like the different people there, like companies in the recreational space or companies in the agricultural and farming space or investing? Was there any sort of specific group that stood out?
Well, I'll say this much. There were a lot of lawyers in terms of attendees, which struck me because there were also some legal... Because I think it's similar to South Africa. They're trying to make sense of what is permissible and what is not permissible. There was agricultural aspects to it. What I did enjoy was we had speakers from different regions. Australia spoke quite well. They spoke about the science. The speakers from that region, they talked about the endocannabinoid system, which was good to hear. There was a lot of North American speakers. For me, the guy from Jamaica was quite interesting because Jamaica, they talked about the cultivation facilities because of the hurricane season or the weather, the extremes in the Caribbean. It was quite interesting to see how they design and build some of their structures if it wasn't outdoors. And that obviously curtails more of a medical market. So it was interesting to see those different perspectives, to see, all the way from Australia in the extreme south, through South Africa, through the Caribbean, and to the North American and Colombian markets. We saw Clever Leaves also speak, which is one of the EU GMP exporters, I think the only exporter from Colombia that exports a finished good, because Colombia is a market where you can only produce a finished product, not even flour, to the international market at the moment. So it's it was nice to just get to speak to different operators in the South American region.
And do you see potential of a business relation, like a diplomatic sort of business relation between, say, South Africa and Mexico, like ways that our countries will be working together? Or do you see us perhaps as competitors in the global race to medicinal CBD and medicinal THC products? And I suppose where we standing with or against, or what's your thoughts there?
It was good to see. So there was collaboration between the organizers and the sponsors of the event and the South African contingent. There was a lot of interaction between the South African group and the participants in Mexico. Thomas Walker is also a cultivation expert out there who spoke. He's been in the region for a while, so he's been assisting a lot of the guys out of, he's based initially from South Africa. He spent some time in Eastern Europe. He spent some time, obviously, in the South American market. But it was good to see that they're actively involved and networked in that space. I would say Colombia would be a major threat because they have a lot of licenses in the space for flower. It's one of, currently their legislation only allows them to export a finished or extracted good. So from a flower, like flooding the market in medicinal flower, maybe less of a concern. But one area I spoke about was it's not so much about the number of licenses you have in a region. What really matters is that you can produce a quality that's going to be accepted on the testing standpoint into the region you're going to with that product. So if you're going into Germany or you're going into a jurisdiction, you want to make sure that you can conform to the testing requirements and that that product or that biomass or flower passes into that region. So more about a quality aspect than quantity aspect when it comes to medicinal. But as we go into those markets maturing and we see, let's call it fast moving consumer goods starting to play more of an impact in the space, I'm sure we'll get a balancing act between the ability to do low cost cultivation and a reasonable testing standard.
It's a little bit worrying to think that other countries are jumping on this. And I mean, Mexico's not the only one that's moving rapidly towards. I mean, even North America, they're getting more and more advanced and more liberalized and legalized. And they're already so far advanced on the rest of the world. And it does, you know, I've always got a vision of how South Africa can hopefully become a powerhouse in sort of the manufacturing and processing and sort of the whole cycle. We can do it. We've got amazing agricultural sector and we've got amazing manufacturing sector. But whether they would do it fast enough that we're going to be able to stay neck and neck with sort of other countries, because the first world countries will depend on sort of third and second world countries for the process, for the manufacturing and processing. So I'm thinking the European market, North American market is going to depend either on Mexico or they're going to depend on like a South African market or say like Jamaica. You know, it's not going to be coming, they're not going to be making in their own markets for their own markets. I think eventually it's just economically would make more sense to outsource it. But it's nerve-wracking. And I mean, do you think the progress on that side, I mean, you did mention that they've still got quite a long way to go. Maybe how close are we in standing? I mean, we've also got a long way to go. But yeah, how far are they from sort of getting a sustainable legal market, legal medicinal market?
Yeah, so I mean, look, let's talk about Mexico. Mexico's got some of the best cannabis in the world. I mean, they're notorious for the quality of the cannabis that comes out of that region in the illicit market. So I think it's one of, there's obviously, whenever you've got a large illicit market, you've got to manage the framework and the history within that space. I think that they have had a medicinal market that was open, I think, even from 2018. It's only now that they're starting to look at how to really get that market to mature. I mean, CBD products there need to get a prescription and it has to have less than 1% THC. So that already tells you that South Africa is quite advanced in terms of its view and position on CBD. Not so much on THC, but I think the biggest thing, and now we talk about, it's almost like a scarcity mindset of competing for set resources. I really feel that we need to talk about every region in the world needs to focus on local access. If we all agree that there is medical benefits to the plant, then we need to be facilitating that. There are too many countries, including Africa, scrambling for these export opportunities. Yeah. And increasingly, you're right, it will be the South Americans, potentially some Australian companies, and South African and other African countries that will become the more cost-effective producers or cultivators, but they will still have to meet standards on their export flower. Yeah. And I mean, we saw Germany about 2 weeks ago also have some domestic cultivation that came online within Germany. So those were the first awarded licenses from BFARM to Can Sativa, who's under 3 different companies that are involved in that agreement to supply to the medical market in Germany.
Same with Netherlands.
I don't always... Yeah, exactly. Bedrocan has supplied the Office of Medical Cannabis for eons. So for me, it's a situation of, I mean, there will be domestic cultivation within all regions. I think most should come from regions where it's the most economically viable, but provided they can meet a standard that makes the health regulators happy. The question is, when do we move increasingly from, health only to a wellness product, and then from a wellness product to an adult use product? And I think those are the transitions that, as those transitions take place, like we've seen in Canada and parts of North America, the different states, I think it's something like 44% of Americans are now living in states that have recreational access. The most recent statistics. So that's big.
Yeah.
And I mean, those are the markets that are flourishing. And I think it's maybe that's the question is, let's not focus always on export. Let's focus on domestic access, and on all forms. You know, whether that's medicinal first and maybe wellness, and then matures to adult use. Those are the areas we need to really focus on because it helps. Yes, there's always benefit for export, but every country needs. We say we all need tomatoes in our countries. You know? So we all need. If it becomes so normalized that cannabis is a normality in a decade from now in every country in the world, then we always will have economies with supporting that infrastructure in a decade's time. It's just a question of who's going to really become the powerhouse. That's up for debate. Yeah.
And then on the last sort of question, I suppose in retrospect, is there anything that South Africa could teach Mexico in terms of, or that you would want to say in terms, or like, you know, that you're seeing happening in South Africa that could be happening in Mexico that they may be not doing, that we're doing better, that you wanted to mention or have been thinking about?
Sure. No, absolutely. I mean, I kind of ended off the discussion I had, and I was lucky enough to get to open the expo in Mexico, so I was really happy about that. But it was one where I said, try not to rush in. You know, don't try to do too many things. Try to be specific on what works for your company or for the type of organization you're driving. Like, focus on an end goal and really know what it means to have a successful product. So if your product is a medicinal product, a wellness product, whatever it is, make sure you know the definition and the risks imposed. So that if you have a product that you have to now export to Israel, and Israel doesn't allow it in for whatever reason, then that's a failed project, that's a failed plan, and that's a failed business. So be very clear on that, and don't try to do 60 things. Try to stay very specific on, it's good to have iteration and adapt to the market, but try to stay within the stream of the original plan. Because too many operators are trying to do everything, and then it diffuses the focus, and it just results in a mediocre product and mediocre success of those companies.
I think a lot of the guys are seeing these wonder companies in North America that are like, they've got the whole vertical chain, nailed down. They're the seed producer, they're the growers, they're the harvesters, the curers, they taking it and processing it, and then they run. They've got the brands, and then they also have the dispensaries, and they literally go right from seed to end consumer. And I can see why you're saying don't jump into, because that took years of development and money.
There's a caveat on that. I'll say this: some states require full vertical integration. So it's not just some states in the US require from seed to sale that you are vertically integrated. Other states require that you are not allowed to do it. So some states won't allow you to vertically integrate to avoid monopolies. Yeah. So that's why the US is so interesting. There's so many different models in play in the US and that's why multi-state operators or MSOs are not always that easy in certain states, because in one state you're allowed to do this, in the other state you can't. So that scaling of the business can become tricky, and provided what happens with federal, the federal nature there of the scheduling, it could change rapidly again based on a decision by Biden's administration. So, I mean, it's interesting. There's a lot of case studies from the States, which is good. I mean, there's nothing wrong with trying to own the entire value chain. I do feel
for sure, no, not at all.
Yeah, the closer you are to the consumer, the more you understand what their needs are, and the better the product will be, and the better the retail margin. But you've also got to be cautious.
Yeah, time, money, persistence, patience, and a whole lot more. Last question, and then we might have to wrap it up. Will you be going back next year? Would you be keen on to the Mexican Expo?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the biggest one I would want to attend is probably MJ Biz in Las Vegas. That's always a massive type of expo. I'm very interested in the European market. So, as the European standards play, I'm just glad there's a South African Expo up again. that we can all attend and get face to face again. So just hoping that that gets realized during the course of this year with the current lockdown situation and the riots.
Yeah.
So let's just, I hope that we have a chance for the community to come together locally, first and foremost, and then we can share the war stories from different regions of the world and just keep learning from each other. Because every time there's these expos, it's such a great exchange of ideas that I've missed now for quite some time.
Yeah, likewise. I'm actually in Europe at the moment, and I was hoping to be at a lot more expos, but the timing couldn't have been worse because of COVID. But anyway, we can rant about COVID all day long. Thank you so much for the info and for the insights. We always really appreciate it. Guys that are still listening, Jeff does have a YouTube channel, which we'll also link below, and he's got some very interesting videos specifically on like a lot of the processing medical side. It's advanced content, and but it's interesting. And it's a lot of discussion-based content, a lot of walkthroughs, things like that. So yeah, you guys really might find some value in there. I always I always learn a few things, and then sometimes I have to ask some questions on it. But yeah, thanks so much, Jeff. And guys, till next time, peace.
Thanks. Cheers, everyone. Bye.